what's that? Oh my God, it's a turtle. It's a turtle. Wow. Yeah.
Tortuga.
No, I'll tell you guys this is a turtle that my mother gave me, and she told me, the tortoise wins the race, the turtle wins the race, and I think that's kind of the way we have to look at our research here. Is we keep going and going and going and going, and the only way that we know we're going to win is because we never stop, and we won't stop until we do win. Good evening, George Webb and Professor Hamamoto. It's so nice to have you all here.
Hey, guys.
Good evening, John. Good evening, George.
Hey, Doctor.
Dr. Hamamoto,
Yes,
what's going on with you? Let's start with you this evening.
Well, speaking of research, it seems that, we've all heard of shadow banning, but it seems that there are these people that shadow copy the only George Webb. A while back, it was Whitney Webb, right, with Mint Press. And then I think you did the research on who's behind it. Isn't that the PayPal guy, Pierre Omidyar or something? Mint Press.
There is Muhawesh, who owns that, but he was very involved in the Iraq War Reconstruction Fund. So I just found that interesting. That her boss, yeah.
Well, what I find interesting, the reason why I mention this is because there's this character who I didn't know about. He was a speechwriter for President Trump, apparently. His name's Darren Beatty, who's recently surfaced on Revolver.news. So I wonder, George or John, if you have any background on what's the provenance of Revolver.news? Because it seems to kind of come here at a time when Alex Jones is trying to rehabilitate himself after that fiasco on January 6th. And he's brought this guy from, supposedly he was a professor at Duke University, but that's not the case. He was an instructor there. He got a degree there in political theory, but all of a sudden he turns up as a speechwriter. And the reason I mention this is because I think it's really important to check out who's supposedly on our end of the field, because we know who the enemies are, right? So I wonder if you've heard anything about that, because apparently, George, what he's done is taken your research of the past 2 years and claimed it for himself, or claimed it for Revolver.news. At least that's the way I read it.
Well, this has been a good week for verification and validation. Tucker Carlson, I had worked with Tucker Carlson's documentary team, Scooter and those folks, and just had said, hey, all the people that you think are somehow bad people at the Capitol are all FBI informants. And I'll go down the list: Caldwell, Joe Biggs, Tario. I'll name them, Emily. And he came out with a big article, and Tucker came out. I fed him the information. Michael Carlin also helped with some January 6th information. And he came out with a bombshell 2 days ago that it's admitted now, Zero Hedge carried it, that January 6th was a big FBI counterintel operation.
Right.
So now they're like,
all out.
Oops. I mean, this it's like, you want to talk about validation. You don't get validation like that. But now what they're trying to do is they're trying to pick up the pieces. They're trying to introduce new people and new names. Everybody knows Tory's information warfare. Everybody knows all these, Tracy Beans, the hacks, that have been kind of torpedoed at me. They're all old. And everybody's already processed the fact that it's disinfo, right? So now they need to come up with some new folks. So I love it. I don't really look behind me very much. I look forward, and I look at your stuff, Doctor. The Hodel stuff was such it's a treasure trove. It's just like every day's Christmas with the Hodel stuff and Wuhan, the vaccines and the drugs flying over the hump. It's just, if I had, just a minute to appreciate all the great research you did, Iris Chang, getting into Unit 731. I mean, I'm looking forward at all those great research
Right.
things.
Well, I'm looking forward as well. And there's one name that is painfully it's being omitted, and I probably purposely so. And again, you were on top of this, and eventually they're going to have to swing around to this name, and that is none other than Kolomoisky and the whole Ukrainian presence. You know, what's up with that? How come that hasn't been mentioned yet? To me, that seems to be just, you know, if not the key, very close to it.
Here we go again. Harry the Greek has a new article about how the Longoria, you know, the child trafficking thing with Peter Strzok and Lisa Page is directly tied to Kolomoisky. He just came out with that article, and it's just an amazing article. And everybody's like, the Justice Department is vacating all these decisions against Longoria. It's a beautiful thing because we've really caught them with their pants down. And I got to hand it to Harry the Greek. You know, Kolomoisky, we had talked about, I'd written 4 books about him or something like that before he got sanctioned by the State Department. Yeah, there you go. Deep state mate. Yeah. But I want to say something about Servitors of Empire, because all this was predicted in Servitors of Empire. If you read Servitors of Empire, you'll read how there was this bifurcation of China. You'll read how the CIA and Western intelligence influences had their pockets of opium trade, and that would naturally move toward these bioweapons with Unit 731, inculcating Unit 731. If you read Servitors of Empire, you have the blueprint. $7 on Kindle, people. $7. And Iris Chang, the whole thing, you laid it out 5 years ago. It was beautiful.
Well, I have another thread to that I like to contribute, and because I'm reconceiving American and really world history as Ibero-Asian in nature, and you were just in San Diego. We usually think of it in terms of the Atlantic trade, right? But I found this great book. It just came the other day, so I haven't really been able to go through it. It's very, very dense. It's an academic. It's a dissertation. It's a doctoral dissertation, and it's published by Amsterdam University Press. And this helps to explain the Prince family. This helps to explain the House of Orange and the Orange Revolution and the British connection and the orange beanies on that fateful day of January 6th. And so this is part of my new historiographic intervention here. And the title of this dissertation is Dutch Ships in Tropical Waters. Now, why do you think all those burgers that Rembrandt van der Rijn was painting, where do you think they got all that wealth to buy that finery? It was not from the colonies in New England. It was from Asia. And it was the Dutch. This is the genealogy of the Erasmus Lab.
Yep.
This is why they think that they have the legitimate right to completely override any form of sovereignty that we as American citizens thought we had, because this is just an extension of this vast overseas empire that's four centuries running. And like you say, this last stage of warfare is the penultimate stage of this 4 centuries long colonial process of overseas maritime trade.
I just saw John tweet out about the Treaty of Westphalia and sovereignty of nations. And this so much flies in the face of that with these old trade routes, and Henry Kissinger sitting up there with Prince Willem, doling out drug territories. So, John, this is right up your alley. You were tweeting about this today.
Well, actually, I picked that up from the Schiller Institute, who just happened to publish that nice little summary of the Peace of Westphalia. That Peace of Westphalia it's so obvious that if you put those 3 ingredients together, you're going to have peace, because the 3 rules are going to keep each nation sovereign. And that means that what you give up is you can't mess around with the stuff inside of another nation. And that is the way that peace was kept for quite a long time in Europe. And that's the reason then I think that's what diplomacy should be doing, is working us back toward a place where we can respect each other's sovereignty. And it makes no sense to blow each other up if you've got the security of your borders, if the security of your financial system, and the security of the essence of life, from food, shelter, clothing, the ability to breathe clean air and drink clean water. Those things come from sovereignty. Without sovereignty, the world really is a jungle, and the survival of the fittest is the rule. And so the people that run the banking institutions are happy to leave things the way that they are, to use the power of investment banking to expand upon their wealth at the expense of everyone else. And that, of course, is a cross-border thing. That was the big problem that the British Empire had with colonies. Was colonies are not allowed to have their own economies within them. If they did, then they wouldn't have any need to trade with the so-called mother country anymore. It's a historical fact that empires need to cross borders, whereas free people need to preserve them. Good fences make good neighbors.
Except those that ring the District of Columbia. They're holding those 500 prisoners, as we found out. That was news to me. But John, that's very true. It's very right. It's very correct, that your assessment there. But the absent presence of the Treaty of Westphalia is the fact that continental Europe plus England would be bound together in relative peace by dividing up the Ibero-Asia part of the world to bring wealth into that system. That's the missing part that the Schiller Institute doesn't really address, because they're not going to be doing just international trade amongst themselves. They're going to be going to Africa, they're going to the Near East, and to the Asia world, as the Kingdom of Holland proved, where that's where the bulk of the wealth is. And by the way, we're getting poised to reset that system with the so-called Belt and Road Initiative. This is also part of that 400-year process there. So peace of Westphalia, yes, but peace at whose expense? It's going to be the Ibero-American world, and it's coming back to bite us right now. That's why you have people like the Pakistani nationals who have infiltrated the national government, and any number of foreign nationals who are running amok in the U.S., including Ukrainians, carving it up, because they're engaged in a civilizational war 4 centuries standing, long before the Republican period of America. And I only got to this by going back in history. This is the cultural forensics part. Going back to the history, to the early Republican period, reading back on it through the literature of Fenimore Cooper, where there's tons of royalists, and there still are here today. And going back to the colonial period, where it was the Kingdom of Holland that was calling the shots there. And John, this is where you come in. I had a question for you. This is from that great journal, and I mean that, I'm not being ironic here, the William and Mary Quarterly, because like I said, I'm reading colonial history, the early Republic part, and I have a question that perhaps some of the great researchers, such as David Underdown, Mark Kulak, right? This is a bloodline here that I don't think anybody's really discussed. And of course, everybody who's in the chat right now, have at it. I'm going to throw a name out here that I think it's key. It's not the key, but certainly we're getting beyond the same names over and over again. Rockefeller, Rothschild, it's just a big echo chamber. And John, you might know this name because you're from this part of the country. And you're also a graduate of William and Mary. Have you heard of the Omohundros family? Apparently not.
Is that the fellow that was once called Gustav Adolphus?
No, the first Omohundrous in what is today the United States of America was named Richard, and he was supposed to be an Englishman, but I mean, that's a really unique name, Omohundrous.
Yeah.
So where is it coming from? And I think, by the way, this is where someone like a Kamala Harris bloodlines comes in. That's probably why they inserted her. She goes back to these early colonial bloodlines that are not necessarily from Europe. Omohundrous is probably South Asian.
Well, I'm looking it up right now on because I'm very curious. I read the name has some resonance in my mind, but I don't know.
And they have a research institute, which is fascinating. And their specialty is George and the reign of King George III. And I think they're royalists even today in 2021. There's a very, very strong royalist streak in American political culture.
Indeed.
And that's why I keep talking, because people believe that Canadians are junior Americans. I keep saying, listen, they belong to the British Empire. They're not part of the U.S.
Well, I'll throw in while John is looking that up. I saw the William and Mary reference, and people don't remember that the Glorious Revolution. William of Orange, right, coming across there with an army to England to take over. This is a coup, folks. This is a covert action. This is not an election. That the Glorious Revolution was anything but a glorious revolution. It was a coup. And these soldiers of Orange took the control of England, folks. And the only reason we're not speaking Dutch is because there was too many people already speaking English. But we did bring some Dutch words into our language. But this thread, this Calvinist thread, ends up becoming part of the Pilgrims that come to Boston, and then filtered down, right, to Hartford and New Haven, to become the crux of the holier than thou, we were the chosen ones, the predestination kids that become Alan Dulles' CIA, right? These are the chosen ones. This is the thinking. Bioweapons are okay because that's God's way of weeding out the people who aren't the chosen ones, right? So and I'm not talking about other YouTube chosen ones. I'm talking about using bioweapons to get rid of everybody who's not a chosen one. We have a universal vaccine for us. Everyone else is wiped out with a bioweapon. And this Calvinist thread, I'm not kidding, comes from the Glorious Revolution. This same, Night Watch, Rembrandt, we're holier than thou, we know best, soldiers of Orange.
Mm-hmm. This is the Dutch ships in tropical waters. It was called Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, or VOC for short. And in English, that reads United East Indian Company. And that's Kamala Harris right there. Yeah. She was her ancestors were part of that bloodlines. I think that melded into the VOC, and now is part of the occupation government that's there right now.
Well, in the trade triangle that people talk about between Africa, England, and the East and West Indies, right? The West Indies,
yes,
right, isn't a sugar. Everybody says, "Oh, it was all sugar." No, it wasn't just sugar and rum. It was also opium and cocaine and these other newfangled drugs that were being developed, right? That were coming from the West Indies. So this is the early days of black tar opium, right? Mm-hmm. This is the big secret. They call it the tea trade. Sometimes they call it the spice trade. It's anything but the tea trade and spice trade. Drugs made the soldiers of Orange. Drugs made the Royal Dutch Empire.
Mm-hmm. And of course, this is already connecting colonial Virginia, very much of the what later became northeastern the United States. That's the power center. That's where it resides to this point. And I think this was a reassertion of power. It's less a coup, but a sort of a reinstallation, a restoration, I guess you can call it, a restoration. And I think one of the problems and this is me, I'm speaking of myself, one of the problems that the flaws, the blind spots I had was that when you think of the Vatican and all the bad PR of the popes and, the whole church history, you think in binary terms, okay, bad Vatican, good Protestant Reformation, right? You think the opposite has got to be good and pure, but you're saying the whole Erasmus worldview is embedded in that glorious revolution, so-called, as well. So that's one of the tricks they have. They're always kind of whipsawing us back and forth.
And I don't want to throw out the great humanist movement, the humanist enlightenment, all the, hey, coffee houses in Europe, coffee houses in Amsterdam. I love coffee. Don't throw out the coffee with the opium. But it brought opium. And let's face it, Henry Kissinger still today is walking across the hall to Prince William's apartment and talking about the old drug routes, the old drug concessions, and getting dispensations. You heard it here first. Henry Kissinger is getting dispensations of trade routes and drug trade from Prince William, now King William, today. They still have a 1590s Dutch East India Company map. They're still parceling out these concessions today.
Well, I looked at the etymology of company. I thought it was originally a French word, but apparently the etymology traces back to Middle English, and literally it means a group together eating bread. Right. That's the image. They're eating they have the loaf. You use the 12 monkeys fighting over the same banana, but they have that one loaf of bread, and we're to have the crumbs, if that much. That's the image. That's what company means. That's the definition. That's the etymology of company.
If you go back to your Chaucer, and everybody loves to do that, right? If you get into a tight spot, always go back to your Chaucer. The first few lines, 32 in a compania, 32 in a compania, right? 32 travelers together in a compania. And that is our heritage of sort of implanting, sort of foreshadowing and foretelling the fact that we would have this corporate evil that would be injected, right, in our future trade routes.
Right. Even if we had the outward form of a constitutional republic, that's why it's so frustrating to me to hear these people who come from the right or the conservative insisting, oh, but we are a constitutional republic, as if uttering that phrase is some kind of magic wand. They don't understand the embeddedness of this cultural history that goes back to in England, before it was in England, before English language was really even fully formed that we know it. And by the way, Chaucer was a wine merchant.
Absolutely. And also Chaucer moved back and forth to the Lombard bankers.
Absolutely.
Right? Back and forth to the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. He was all about the French merchant class moving the financial power center to Amsterdam from Venice, was he not? Right? He was an English spy, if nothing else, to effect this new mercantile world, right? Of these new instruments, this new money, these new bills of lading, these new letters of credit, this whole new mercantile world he ushered in for the Bank of England and the City of London.
And John, that's where the Venetians come in, that the LaRouche organization keeps hearkening back to. Is that correct? That banking system, the Venetian banking system?
Well, yeah, I don't know how much to associate that with the LaRouche organization, but the Venetian banking system, is well, right. This is what Webster Tarpley's work was to lead us from Amsterdam. I mean, from Venice to Amsterdam, and then from Amsterdam, as George pointed out at the top of the show, to London, with the Glorious Revolution. And remember that this is not just about soldiers and opium. This is about banking and the Venetian system of trade, in which they controlled all the transportation. They had all the entire Mediterranean was completely Venetian galleys run by galley slaves, and they had a timetable, just like the trains have a timetable, and they got their cut out of every single thing that was shipped from anywhere to anywhere, and they were run as an oligarchy. And that's the other characteristic of the Dutch, is that stadtholders are an oligarchy, and the Venetian Doge is appointed by the secret family circle, and I can't remember the names of them, but there's certain ones that were like supposedly came from the original Roman Empire, and then there were some new ones that were added onto it. But basically, it's just a small circle of families, just like we have in New England and New York and today, with all the studies we've done with Mark and Bill and Mobster and everyone else. It's tied all these families together. Now, that banking system is what we've now are fighting today. It's the same empire. It's the empire that runs through controlling entire economies, the same way that the Venetians controlled the transportation in the Mediterranean for 250 years. And that's how you build that wealth. And of course, they already had the wealth, because where'd they get it from? Well, they got it from the Crusades. The Crusade, specifically the Crusade that went to Constantinople. I think that was the Third Crusade, which was basically a ripoff of a way for the Catholic Christians to rip off the Orthodox Christians. So they just went and took all of the good stuff, all the gold, everything, and that is probably the basis of all of this wealth. Going back, before Venice to it's the Fourth Crusade. It was the one that they said, we're going to go and conquer the Holy Land, but then they ran out of money and they ran out of food, and they said, oh, guess what? Those people over in Constantinople, well, they're kind of Christians, but they're actually really bad people, and they got a lot of money and food, and we're hungry, so let's go beat them up. And so they just did. Conquest of Constantinople by the Crusaders. That was because where did Constantinople get all the wealth? Well, that was the principal city of the Roman Empire. After 476 AD, the Roman Empire continued. Well, they continued. They left Rome, but they didn't stop being the empire. So they took all their stuff with them, just like the Nazis took all their stuff to South America. The Romans didn't lose the money. They just moved it to Constantinople. So you can trace this empire probably, if you want to, all the way back to Egypt and Babylon and everything else. But the way that it's maintained with the oligarchical rule and the total control of transportation and trade, that is the British way today. And I think the people at LaRouche have done a good job of distinguishing that imperial way with the way that America is supposed to be run. And I certainly would concede that it's not run the way it's supposed to be run. But I don't think we're at a point where we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, at least not yet.
Well, John, you answered through Sideways the question I put out about the Omohundro bloodline.
I don't know though.
You mentioned Sumeria, you mentioned Egypt. I'm going to stick my neck out here. I'm going to push the timeline even further. I think the Omohundros, who later settled, I mean, they went through the British Isles, of course, where we know that history, that crypto history. It's unofficial history, and we know they settled in the Virginia colonies. I think that Omohundro family have their origins in these royal Egyptian bloodlines. Well, goes way back then, because it's not all about banking and the material wealth. All these empires really rest upon metaphysical legitimacy. There has to be some sort of aboriginal legitimacy for these empires. Otherwise, they can't justify. What's prevent a usurper from coming in and saying, well, that's ours now. That's our wealth. If you can claim descent from a sun god or Ra or whoever else, some constellation of gods or supernatural powers, then you don't have to even deal with that. It's unquestioned that this is your domain, and all the people who are on it are nothing but expendables, right? And is that not how the American people, who we thought we were citizens, is that not how we are being treated today in 2021? We are as if we're back in the times of Babylon.
George, go ahead. I didn't want to, but there's a lot I wanted to answer there, but
fine.
Let's hear.
Well, I don't mean to cut you off, John, but I'm glad you brought it back to the 21st century because what we spun here in the first 30 minutes is this Gordian knot that seems unbelievably complicated and intertwined and intertwixt, and there's no way that you could get through it, right? This Gordian knot. But we know that Alexander and his solution to the Gordian knot was just to cut straight through it, right? And I don't mean to jump too far forward here, but if you look at McDuff, John's father, if you look at McDuff, he takes this Calvinist, predisposition of these people who think they're the inheritors of this great, tradition, and their bloodlines, and they're just meant to be the rulers of this new land, America, right? Anything's fair game, bioweapons, anything. Somebody has to come along. There has to be a hero that comes along and goes, no, and calls it out. And this is where I'm really focusing in on right now, which is our chance to cut that knot, to take what we learned from previous generations and end this heraldry, and constantly we're always predestined to just be kowtowing to these elites, right? And then go back to the founding fathers and go back to the Constitution, right? Mm-hmm. And so I look at the characters like McDuff who go, wait a minute, I was born and bred in this whole milieu, right? I went to school with Rockefellers. I went to school, or in the same school anyway. I went to school with the De Mornschelds, and I chose a different path. So I wanted to turn this toward the resolution of the great soldier cutting the knot, if I could, because I think that's the solution going forward for us.
Agreed, George. The knot has to be cut, the Gordian knot, as you put it. But we have to figure out first, and this is where the cultural forensics parts comes in. We have to figure out, what is the knot? What is the true knot? You mentioned America, but America was not conceived of as America by its settlers who were part of this elite bloodline. America was conceived as the new Atlantis, and that comes from no one. That's Francis Bacon. Okay, so it comes from a very, very high source there. Now, the person, the historian, the crypto historian of this whole crypto history, this crypto culture that I'm trying to talk about, and it's not my innovation. I'm just reading history in a far more expansive civilizational fashion, taking it back millennia as opposed to decades. But the person who really gave us the crypto history, it was not William Shakespeare, it was Edward de Vere. He was of that world, and he was transcoding it into theatrical terms or literature terms, and bringing that message, sending that message down to us. And through that means we can decode the plays, the comedies, and the tragedies of Edward de Vere, usually ascribed to William Shakespeare. And then we'll find what the knot is, and then we can cut it.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, Edward de Vere, the great humanist, the great, the comeuppance, the little guy that could, the up and comer. He's gonna take down these incrustations of royalty and inheritance, and there is going to be a room for the common man, right? This is, Francis Bacon, I would put in the same group. The Earl of Oxford supposedly has a painting where he's shaking a spear
Right.
intimating that he is Shakespeare, right?
Yeah.
But I definitely believe in this humanist promise, that there is something a great egalitarian world beyond. If we have the courage, we summon the courage amongst us to be as smart as we can be and as brave as we can be to fight against this thing, right? This is sort of like a intellectual version of George slaying the dragon, St. George slaying the dragon. And I think De Vere's, folios and so forth talk about that, and Shakespeare, maybe 3 different authors, right? There's definitely the romantic comedies and the tragedies, and then the tragic comedies.
Then there's the Italian connection, Annie Bassano. You've
Yeah,
heard of her, right?
the romances and so forth.
Yeah.
But I look to the De Vere type stuff, and I would
Mhm.
throw a few other authors' names in there as well, as saying, and I hate to go back to the McDuff character, but I've written so many books about him that I feel like I have to.
Well, he comes right out of Shakespeare.
Exactly. He's right. He's born into all this. He's from nothing, and then he's then something. And he could just take that ring and be amongst all the princes.
Mm-hmm.
And he turns it away. And then that is the tragic comedy, or the of McDuff. And he's bigger than any Shakespeare, really, because it's our time. It's us right now. This is defining our time. And maybe the Q loophole is created because he works with Hoover and figures out how these Nazis are coming in and how these Russians are coming in, and they collect all the files, and then they create the Q loophole. It's really a Shakespearean play, writ large, right in front of us for now, and it's a recipe for now. And so if we can get to this Gordian knot, this Q knot, I really think we can shake this loose, because I think the people that are inside the government want to help. They know something's horribly wrong. They know our country's under lockdown, but they don't know how to get through the knot.
Well, sensing a little silence, I'll jump in for a minute.
Well, you're the sun.
You're the air.
I know, but I'm carrying these thoughts from 10 minutes ago that I didn't want to let go. So
Okay, go ahead.
Trying to catch up with my own short-term memory. Let me put in a plug for this book here. You guys are talking about the history that's recited in this book. It's how the nation was won by H. Graham Lowry, and I'm about 2/3 way through reading it. I'm going to resume reading it as soon as I can, but this is the answer to the question of how could a popular sovereignty type of attitude, how could the Declaration of Independence type of common man be part of America when it was really created by these upper class royalist, merchant, exploitative, slaveholding, opium selling, exploiting class. And the answer is that there was also the original Puritans and the people that wanted to actually start a new world in the sense of completely disassociating itself from the rule of the empire, to say we're not going to be part of this empire. We're going to start something brand new. Mm-hmm. And the fight between those people and their descendants and the people that followed after them, and the royalist types has been really the history of the country. So as more and more of the common people came in various waves of immigration, you ended up with very much of a balance of power between the common people that would want to have a Declaration of Independence, want to have a Bill of Rights, want to stand up for the individual rights of human people, as opposed to the royal types that didn't want to have any Bill of Rights. They didn't want to have any rights at all, as you say, Professor, for the common people who are basically just serfs, and you can use them, abuse them, and fold, bindle, and spindle them all day long, and it doesn't matter because they're just serfs. And that's what they did. One of the greatest examples of that is William Byrd II of Westover, Virginia, who he was the great royalist descendant. And what you find is the first families of Virginia are really worth studying because they are royalists. And the Byrd family, which descends right now to today, the same line from William Byrd I, the immigrant, have always associated with that upper class, and they were the first people involved in enslaving, slave trade, and using slave labor on their plantations. That's the wrong William Byrd. That is William Byrd the musician, which is a different guy entirely. So let's let's leave him alone. William Byrd the musician is an interesting person too. He's about 100 years before William Byrd the immigrant to Virginia. But these people that are the Byrds and the Carter from King Carter, the Landon Carter, all of these people are royalists. Their ancestors fought for King Charles and King James, and were in favor of James II, even though he was a Catholic, because they were like high church Anglicans and basically kind of closet Catholics themselves. This is what's interesting, is that in Virginia, which is the biggest colony by the time of the Revolution, the development of the mountains, when they start going out to the mountains, is when we get a lot of just immigrants from Ireland, Scotland, soldiers from the wars. These immigrants are going to be the low church types. If you understand that low church means that we in our congregation are going to appoint our own ministers, and we're going to have our own ceremonies, and we're not going to be ruled by a bishop or a pope or anybody. We're us. That's low church. But high church is entirely opposite. And the history of this country has been the history of the fight between low churches and high churches. And right now, the high churches are very much in the ascendancy, especially the Anglican Church is just so dominant in the East Coast cities, all up and down the East Coast, and especially in New England. So the idea that America was founded only by these aristocrats is only telling half the story. America was founded by poor people as well, and they were, just fleeing from this imperial system that we'd like to get out from under ourselves. You're right; it has been imposed on us. It's been imposed on us during the 20th century, and it starts wherever you want to start. You want to start with Teddy Roosevelt. You want to start with the Federal Reserve, Woodrow Wilson. You want to start with the State Department in the 50s. Everything has been taking away our individual rights and giving them to the corporations, who now are regarded as persons, even by the Supreme Court of the United States. So, yeah, it's been a terrible transition, but I think it's kind of like our house almost burned down, but we still got the foundation. We still got the basics of how to put it back together. And I'd rather see us put our energy to eliminating the illegal, the dark, the rat lines, and reinforcing what we have left of the original documents and the intent of the founders on their good days. I'm sure there was some founders that just said, well, heck, I'm going to go exploit people because it's fun, and they were. But the ideals, if we lose our faith in our ideals, then I think we're going to lose the cohesion that we still have. And that's what's so valuable, because it does keep us basically feeling free. I feel basically free most of the time, even though I get my channel on YouTube stricken. I'm not under armed guard. I'm not locked up. I can get in my car and drive where I want to. As long as we got basic stuff like that, I don't think we should throw away the foundation of our country.
Well, there is hope. Richard Omohundro was a Virginian, and he would have greeted William Byrd II at Dockside when he arrived fresh off the boat. That's how far back Richard Omohundro goes. But if you look at their site, and Andy pulled it up earlier, the site of the Omohundro Foundation, and this gives me cause for hope. They are very interested in soul-searching the legacy of the Omohundro as a slave-owning family, and they want a reconciliation with the present here. And that tells me there is some aspect of the traditional oligarchy who want to sit at the table and hash out all these issues that we've been talking about for this almost 1 hour yet. So there is a glimmer, more than a glimmer, there's a large strain of hope in the people who run the foundation today in the 21st century, who understand, at least they understand their history. Most Americans do not. They do, because they understand the importance of family and the bloodlines going back 20, 25 generations in America alone. So there they are. And if you go to their site and you read their material, they're not beating themselves up like Antifa or BLM wants us to. They are looking at a sincere peace and reconciliation process to heal these historic wounds and take us further into the 21st century. So I think we should build on that. But that's why BLM and Antifa were created, to marginalize these groups and make them say, oh, screw it. Why should we even bother? No one's listening. These people are so rabidly committed to their fake historiography that there's no room, there's no opportunity for political dialogue.
Well, I remember William and Mary well because I was recruited in 1982 to play there. And they said, we have a pretty weak power forward. He's 6'8", but he can't jump. He's slower than you. His name is James Comey. And I didn't go to William and Mary because I thought, well, I mean, if Comey is the best thing you could come up with a power forward, I'm going to be cleaning up his slop, over there. Anyway, I didn't go to William and Mary, but I think you make a good point about William Byrd. And if you look at William Byrd, he was one of the early guys who was saying smallpox. Let's do inoculations for smallpox.
That's right.
And that was the key. Bioweapons was the key way back then, because they realized if they did the cowpox vaccination, that they would naturally just spread the contagion and they would inherit the earth. They wouldn't have to fight for it.
Yeah.
And that is William Byrd's kind of ace in the hole. And fast forward to Fort Detrick. Fast forward to now. Same story. Look for some smallpox. Do a control efforts. There you go. That is inculcated within this Royal Dutch strategy of conquest. Don't fight for it. Just eliminate them with contagion. And we have to be smarter. If we're smarter, this is what I always say, we get Henry Kissinger at the chessboard. We play it out there. We don't play it out fighting against their bioweapons. And I love the character of McDuff. I'm sorry, he's such an attractive character. I keep coming back to him because he's this guy who's a man for all seasons. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes, Robert Bolt.
Yeah, and he just has this kind of perspicacity where he understands this and that and the other thing, and he puts it all together. And he's consulting with Hoover on how they doing this, how they bringing these bioweapons guys in, and then you've got I.B. Hale. I.B. Hale is the dark weapons guy in Dallas. He's bringing in all the Nazis with all the Nazi war machine into the Texas school book depository, right? So my next book I think is going to be I.B. Hale, who comes up with a conveyor belt, the conveyor belt of taking these Nazi secrets and moving them directly to all these Nazi space and weapons companies in Dallas with Lyndon Johnson. And the beautiful part about this research is we're just at the start. You know it's going to be McDuff. You know it's going to be I.B. Hale. You know it's going to be Mayhew. CIA versus the good FBI, and we're going to find the answer. And when we do, everyone's going to go, oh my God, that's the Toto moment. That's what really happened. All this other stuff we've been told is false, fake narratives, and fairy tales.
So, George, just to preview it, the I.B. Hale connection, is that the Latin American connection? The Nazi International coming through New Orleans to the southern border? And all the people that they expatriated down in, Argentina and Uruguay and Paraguay?
Potentially. We know that he ends up with the Convair, which is a precursor of General Dynamics. We know his son murders Connolly's daughter. It's not very often that you shoot somebody in the Kennedy motorcade, kill the daughter before the assassination. Also, he married Judith Exner. Robert Hale, the son of I.B. Hale, married Judith Exner, and they run Judith Campbell, at both Bobby Kennedy and
Sam Giancana.
And Frank Sinatra and JFK. And she dies a year before this whole thing. So they're killing these girls after they've run them at the Kennedys, and then all of a sudden, what happens? Rick Olson sent me the ABC News breaking news. Kennedy has downgraded the CIA to the Joint Chiefs of Staff to report to the Joint Chiefs of Staff on November the 22nd, 1963, in the morning of, and he's shot 4 hours later. So this is the Q clearance. They had this little loophole, and now Kennedy's going to bring it down and mix it in with all the other McDuff files, and literally Kennedy's dead 4 hours later.
And Seymour, I don't know if you saw that wiki. Seymour Hersh wrote the first book-length expose, The Dark Side of Camelot. Your mentor, Seymour Hersh.
Yeah.
He lays it out. Judith, and by the way, I think I might be wrong on this, but I think Judith Campbell Exner died of a fast-acting cancer virus.
She sure did.
Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And Connolly's daughter, Robert Allen Hale, just blew her head off. I mean, there was no fast cancer. So, and then Robert Allen Hale also kills Hale Boggs, the congressman who said after they came up with a saxitoxin, after they discovered the saxitoxin, he said, hey, we need to look at this again because it looks like the saxitoxin was to kill everybody in Saxa. Right. And so he dies in a plane crash in Alaska, where he was lured by Robert Allen Hale. And guess what? They also lured Bobby Kennedy there to dedicate a mountain called Mount Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy almost dies in a mountaineering accident by Robert Allen Hale. So the Hales here, and guess who? Guess who was born at the same year I'm born in Dallas, Texas? One Ken Hale of Norfolk, Virginia. So is he the son of Robert Allen Hale? We don't know. But he's got the flamethrowers. He's got the Waco. He's got the Jonestown. I'm just saying, I want to, inquiring minds want to know, is this Hale thing a cover where they were going to try to make themselves to be the Patriot spies? And they took the name of Nathan Hale. And they're not Hales at all. They're just murderers. Hale was a sniper for the FBI. And this is John's talked about this a lot. There was these sellouts. There was these FBI guys that were sellout agents to the CIA. And it had to be, I know McDuff was looking at these guys and saying, you're bringing Nazis into our critical infrastructure for our defense, for our missiles, for all this stuff, satellites. What? You're selling out our country? No, not on my watch.
The themes that you guys are talking about come together at Saxa, as exactly as you say, George. when Victor Krulak, the first Saxa that my father worked for, was a Kennedy man and wanted to do what Kennedy wanted. And I think one of the things that people will notice if you read my book is that Krulak had defined counterinsurgency in a way that we don't understand it today. What he thought it was a good thing. It was like, we're going to go out and help people make sure that they've got a safe place to farm, to keep their communities together, to support their economy, to support their security, and to be just nice people that know that the folks are struggling in Vietnam and they need some support because there's bandits and criminals and bad guys running around. So we're going to support them and make sure that they have a safe place to develop their own country. And that was Krulak's idea. And they didn't want to have armies and divisions and helicopters and the big war. But that was what Johnson brought with him when they got rid of Kennedy, was the go ahead for the big war. And after Krulak, we had General Anthus, and then following General Anthus was this man, General William R. Pierce, who became the Saxa in 1966 and 67. He lasted almost a year, but he was the first overtly CIA officer to hold the position of Saxa. He had been CIA all along. He had been an early member of the CIA, and he was a veteran of Detachment 101 of the OSS, operating out of Burma, doing what? Doing the hump that George has been talking about. And he also directed and organized the Kuomintang's guerrilla army incursions into China after the PRC won in 1949. He was running guerrilla armies into China on behalf of the nationalist Chinese, which of course is the opium business side of the Chinese Civil War. So Piers, and I think that sounds kind of like a Dutch name to me, and right down there in Southeast Asia is basically sitting in the catbird seat, watching all of this opium going around and trading for arms, and the whole thing is going. Well, that's fine with him, because he famously says, if it takes opium to win the war, I will use opium. And that was the philosophy of these guys. And that's what did you just say about William of Orange? And what did you just say about the VOC? And the same applies equally, if not worse, to the British East India Company, the BEIC. Those two companies ended up working together, but the tradition is the same, as complete exploitation of anybody that's not part of your inner circle. And that comes together as you study McDuff's life, and you see that, wow, here he was working for a peaceful support of these the South Vietnamese villagers as that kind of counterinsurgency. But now, if you say counterinsurgency now, what do you think of massive search and destroy missions? With Forrest Gump, going out there with his buddies and getting blown away by all of these people in the jungle that they never don't even see. That is what people think of as counterinsurgency, but it's actually the opposite of what the people like my father and Krulak and President Kennedy wanted to provide in terms of counterinsurgency support of the population. So, yeah, I think General Piers brings it all together in one package, that Saxa was turned from the Kennedy vision to the Johnson nightmare.
Well, with that, John, I think that puts a cap on it. You wrote the book. We had a beautiful ceremony. You had a beautiful great speakers. Dr. Hamamoto was one of them, and I'm just congratulate you on the great book McDuff Lives, and we can't wait to print a whole bunch of them.
Yeah,
it was a great achievement, John.
There it is.
And applause, nice. applause, everybody in the chat,
and Andy DeBala and Dave Horlick and and Addie Ads and everybody else. I know a lot of people took a hand at printing those first 25 copies that we were able to distribute at the event. And I've got one for Professor Hamamoto. I'm going to send you very shortly.
Oh, great.
And, George, you've already got yours, but I can't thank you enough for all the work you did and you're still doing to help us understand and fulfill what my vision is, and that is by understanding and learning what happened to McDuff and what his life was for and how it got ended. We can see what happened to our country and who did it. And as you say, it is the same people. It's the same people from Fletcher Prouty's secret team to Peter Strzok today. And I mean it's the same people. So
Agreed. Well, let's continue on that. And I want to
Yes.
thank you guys so much. And thank you, Andy DeBala. I don't think you're mic'd up, but I know Andy stayed up till 3 a.m. and we had a beautiful ceremony. Andy, I
he
don't
was
know.
up till 6 a.m, George. Give
Okay.
him credit.
Okay. But Andy, I don't know if you have pictures of the McDuff book signing, but it was an incredible event. And we had all these great speakers, Dr. Hamamoto and all these great speakers. So it was just a fun event. And it was a culmination of so much work on your part, John.
All right, everybody. Thanks, George, Professor.
Congratulations,
Everybody
John.
again next week. And George, thanks again. Congratulations on your work, and Professor Hamamoto.
Congratulations, George. You've been vindicated.
Thank you.
We knew it. Bye.